My name is Glen McKnight. I've been in the industry for almost 15 years. I started as an artist and effects designer, and now my full-time position is design director at Other Ocean.
That's cool. So I was just going to call you a senior designer, but you're the design director. If you were to give one piece of advice to an aspiring game developer or game designer, what would it be?
Is learn a little bit about all the disciplines. Like spend some time, learn a simple programming language, get some basic skills.
All right, folks, Rocco here from Simmer.io. Actually doing a new experiment. I have a good friend of mine from a long time ago, Glen McKnight, that is a game developer in the games industry. And I thought it'd be kind of interesting to start sharing, what it's really like to be a game developer and some of the pros and cons of all that type of stuff. So, Glen, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your career so far?
Okay. My name is Glen McKnight. I've been in the industry for almost 15 years. I started as an artist and effects designer, and it wasn't even considered designer. I was purely doing particle effects for a Dexter's Laboratory game, hand-drawn on paper. And then over the years, I worked on some GameCube titles and then moved out here to California and started working on PSP titles. And then somewhere in there, I started shifting from just level artist and effects person to more of a designer. And now my full-time position is design director at Other Ocean.
That's cool. So I was just going to call you a senior designer, but you're the design director. That's worth at least another 0 on your salary. Is that right?
Yeah, it doesn't quite work.
So you make $1 million a year, $2 million a year, something like that.
Something a little more humble.
A little bit more humble. Okay.
Yes.
Well, it's cool that you get to sort of do this passion-based game development, right. And I was in the industry myself for a couple of years, and
that's in fact how we met.
That is how we met. Actually, I met you before we actually met in person. I saw a video from you that was sort of part of your way of getting in and showing off a sort of a portfolio. You want to tell us about that?
Yeah. So I came from the art background, and my original goal in getting into the industry, I was trying to get into a more advertising style of industry. So I wanted to do kind of like very stylistic commercial work. And so I was really into exploring like how to like sell things.
Right.
So my pitch was a combination of like a puppet show. So I basically sent out a demo reel that included a little puppet character who was a narrator of my experience.
And this was before, I guess YouTube might have been around, but it was before, just putting up videos was like
it was hard.
Thing,
Yes. When I put it up, it was a QuickTime movie that I had to embed into a file, and it was terrible.
And would you just take it on a point and shoot?
Yeah, I had an old video camera, and then I would have to transfer it, to the computer. It was terrible. But the subcomponent of the whole story was I realized I wanted, references, like people think.
Right. This is the part I was going to ask you about because it's funny.
And so I thought, it'd be really funny because people always kind of pick people in their life that they already are like, oh, they're going to say great things about me. So if you call me in. So I said, you know what? I'm going to get my grandparents to give me a reference. And it was like gold because my grandmother wanted to set up the
kind
room.
of like, they were somewhat older, right? Like,
yeah.
80s at the time?
Yeah, they were in their 80s. My grandmother's very Southern. She's got a heavy accent.
Right.
She wanted to present herself in her sitting room, and so we filmed her. And she just wanted to talk about what a proud grandson I was, and I thought that was really clever. And then I think my grandfather probably had the coined phrase that everyone always remembers is he's got a lot of gumption.
Yes.
It's not a word you hear very often.
It's a very Southern word, isn't it?
It is a very Southern
word. You've got a lot of gumption, Forrest Gumption.
Yeah, and this was really just a bookend on a more standard demo reel because I had been looking at the art background, and I don't think demo reels are even as common anymore.
But, it's kind of like when we saw that, I started at Backbone Entertainment 2 weeks before you, and it just kind of went viral around the office. So I think you really achieved what you wanted to do, and maybe like all that other hard work that you did on your demo reel kind of was like less noticed, but you're like, oh, this dude's a creative dude. He's doing some like really interesting stuff, and I think that's probably some good advice for people looking to get into the industry. What can you do to set yourself apart, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's something to be said for, in any part of the games industry, you have to sell yourself. It's a small industry in the grand scheme of things. When a lot of hiring is done at smaller studios, it really is by individuals on the team. There's not a big, huge mechanism to like direct that. And so just something that makes people pause for a moment and look at you further. Whether that's your website has an interesting style, or something you say in your cover letter that people thought, oh, that's kind of funny. That you just want people to just slow down and think about you for a little bit longer.
Right, because there's like, you go through a pile of, I've been on the other side where you go through a pile of resumes, and it's all like acronyms and, well, I'm in programming, but it's all acronyms and stuff, and I like to see at least a little tiny bit of personality in those, and everyone's different, but
no, I mean, you're gonna still be evaluated on your skills and like what you could bring to the table, but definitely everyone says, I know this programming language, I know these tools, and that's good that it's on there, but I think what people are really looking for is like a connection, really.
And I think engineers have a easier time than designers, like kind of just jumping around at things.
Sure.
So, we have to be less creative. But, in these design positions are pretty competitive, especially at the entry level. Would you say that?
Yeah, I think the challenge for designers is it's a slightly nebulous position, right? Like every studio, even if they have level designers, what their level designer does compared to another studio can really vary wildly.
Right.
And so I think what happens in the design hiring process is you're looking for someone who can think well, has a way to communicate. And so, essentially how you do in an interview and how you can talk to people is a little bit of a litmus test on your ability to be a good designer.
Well, and also not being an asshole is important too. I always got that one. Shh, be quiet. At this point, I guess I wanted to talk a little bit more about some of the actual games that you worked on. And I think the first one that comes to mind is Geist. And why don't you start talking about that? And also, I have that follow-up question about the famous meeting the famous game designer there.
Right. So the first real major game I got to work on was a game called Geist. It was being developed in Orlando, Florida for the GameCube. But what was really unique about the development is we were actually doing it first party for Nintendo. So Nintendo was our publisher. And for people who aren't
Is that what they call second party, or?
I'm not even sure. Yeah, so we were contracted directly to Nintendo to make the title. And so all design stuff went through Nintendo Direct, as opposed to a lot of games in development are made for an external publisher.
Right, and that's what we did for a long time at Backbone.
Most commonly, when people think of games, they think of like EA or these big studios. Those are like third-party, or I guess they would be external developers who are not working directly for one of the major clients, such as Nintendo, Sony, or Microsoft.
Like Konami would hire another developer usually.
Right.
Like does Konami do stuff in house? I guess they probably do.
Yeah. So usually the big publishers do in-house development and then do some amount of external development. It just kind of broadens their portfolio. The external development allows for cheaper, essentially, products to come out. So, your Assassin's Creed is getting made in-house by Ubisoft.
Right.
But then Ubisoft might contract out for a fun, like, action game that they saw somewhere out of developer.
Right. And then even from there, sometimes the developers then contract out a lot of the, you have a developer in the United States, you contract out a lot of the artwork to other countries too. Like, we want 50 variations on this tree. Like, is it worth it to pay a U.S. designer
Right.
or artists to do that kind of stuff. So that's just part of the reality of the industry.
Right.
And it's kind of like at every level, there's sort of another. There's just different levels to it.
Yeah.
And things of that nature.
I think in the time we've been in the industry, it's been growing and becoming a more global industry.
Right.
So when we worked for Nintendo on Geist, it was still a very young kind of concept. I think the only game Nintendo had really done with an external developer was the Metroid series.
Oh, really? I didn't even know that.
Yeah, and so they were a little tenuous about this idea. So we started working with them on this Geist concept, which was essentially a story of a guy who gets pulled out of his body and becomes a spirit. Mm-hmm. And then the idea was it was some version of kind of like a haunting game and a game about possession. And the game was developed for over 5 years.
Wow.
Yeah, and for a smaller studio, it was a big commitment.
Right.
And so
I haven't committed to anything for 5 years, except my wife. All right.
Yeah.
Next subject. So you met a famous game designer during that time there. Was that in person or was that?
No. So we would have people from Nintendo of Japan come over, and they would be in a conference room for a day or 2 days straight, mm-hmm. and with their translators would communicate all their kind of goals and ideas for where the game should go. Mm-hmm. And at one point, we had been working on a boss, and the boss was just like, no one was super in love with the boss. Like,
just kind of bland, right?
Yeah, just not very dramatic. The experience was a little, it's like it was just a generic looking monster. Mm-hmm. And somehow through the translated feedback we got the feedback that Miyamoto believed that
Miyamoto is the developer of Super Mario, for anyone who's living in a box.
Yeah. He is essentially the most senior creative person in the Nintendo world.
Probably in the world, right?
Sure. I mean, he is a legend.
Right. But anyway, get back to what you're saying.
Yeah, I think he must have come in and someone had shown him the game, because he wasn't giving us a lot of direct feedback all the time. And we got this one line that said, the monster should be a lot more like poop.
Yes, more like poop.
And
that's how you become the most famous game designer in the world.
And I think we had to interpret that, right? Among all this other feedback. And this is a common thing when you are a developer working for someone else.
Right.
Is you get a lot of feedback, and your job is to process that and respond to it. And I think anyone who's working on games now, even if they're working on an independent game, they get their friend to play. Mm-hmm. You get feedback like, I don't like this, or this is dumb.
Right.
And you have to try and watch how they play the game, or...
Oh, it's terrible. Like, I remember the first time we did a play test on Death Jr., I'm like, no, don't do that. Do something else.
Yeah, it's very humbling to have someone come and play a game that you've been working on for a long time.
And you have to shut your mouth, right, to get real, true, valuable feedback. And that's kind of one of those things where you just want to tell them, oh no, the loot box is over here or something. Right. Like, you didn't see that giant arrow that we had pointing to go to this part of the level. They're all lost and stuff like that.
Yeah, we could probably talk for hours about the process of getting really good information and feedback from users, because it sounds really easy. You're like, oh, let someone play the game,
right,
and then hear what they have to say, and then you'll know what to change or fix. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't ever come out that simply.
Well, and I mean, on the flip side of that, once you've gone through the whole process of putting together a level, sort of going back and redoing it can be pretty arduous, right?
Yeah, I mean, there is definitely a lot of pain and suffering that comes from having something that you thought was done or really close,
right,
and then putting it in front of someone who's never seen your product,
right,
and then they go, oops, and then you're like, oh no, everything is messed up,
right. Especially a linear platform game, you don't want to have someone get stuck at some level and just put it down forever, because you spent all this time on all those other levels thereafter, so you need to make sure
they move through the game. And so Geist was the first game I really got to sink my teeth on. And since it was such a long development, I started in the kind of effects group and then I was building some levels and some multiplayer arenas. And then at some point I kind of shifted into a more like scripting effects role where I was doing some amount of gameplay scripting in the house's own kind of like script language.
So this was at Geist?
At Endspace was the studio.
At Endspace or
yeah.
at the studio. Are they still around? Or
I don't think they are. They were developing... They might still be living, but at a much smaller scale. I think they went ups and downs through this challenging industry we've had.
Hang on, let me get one of my assistants to check on that for me, and I'll get back to you on that. Then you moved to Backbone after working at Endspace, is that right?
Yeah, so I was living in Orlando, Florida. It's where I went to school.
Right.
And I heard all the big jobs were in California.
Yeah, California.
Yeah, so I moved out without a job.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
You kind of just took the leap and said...
Yeah, we packed up everything. We got rid of our apartment. We put what we wanted in a car. We sold everything else at a garage sale.
Nice.
And then we just drove out here. The one thing that we had is we had a landing point. We had a family friend who lived here in the Bay Area, and she gave us basically a free room.
Right.
It was an indefinite time. We were trying to be out as fast as possible. Yeah. Well, it was tough, right? We didn't want to intrude. We didn't know her that well, so we kind of just lived in one room. I remember that we had a TV in the room and a bed, and so we would like come into the house, go into the room, and try and not bother her.
Did you have a George Foreman grill in there too?
No, but we didn't use her kitchen, so I don't even really remember how we ate.
Was that in the city, or was that...
It was in San Leandro, which is kind of in the suburbs outside.
Right, so that's down south of Oakland a little bit.
Yeah, so...
Doesn't matter. Most people don't know the geography of the Bay Area. It's all good.
Yeah. So I move out here, and I'm like super excited. I've been working in the industry for 2 or 3 years.
Right.
And I'm like, I got to be able to find a job out here. This is where all the jobs are.
You're going to make the mad bang?
Yeah,
I'm going to come out to California?
And I desperately started hunting because my first lead was at Double Fine. They needed an effects artist, and it turned out they needed a programming effects artist. They needed someone who could actually write code to the effects, and that was not what I had been doing. I've been doing a lot more just sprite art and stuff. So.
I mean, that's pretty fancy stuff. You need to know physics. You need to know probably C++ back then. Unless you had studied that in college, you're going to kind of run into a lot of problems towards the beginning. I mean,
and so I kind of was like just hunting, and I found Backbone, and they were making the Death Jr. game, and it was like right in the style that I kind of was comfortable with, I could speak to.
So why don't you tell us like what was the premise of that game? Because it's a really cool premise, I think. Execution, okay, right? We did an okay job with it. I think it got 70s, 80s on. I don't even know if there was Metacritic, but whatever people were looking at back then.
It was the early versions of Metacritic. We were trying to make a game, and I came in and they'd already started development, right? I think they'd been developing for maybe a year when I got there.
But what's the premise of it?
The premise is you are the son of death.
Death, like the guy with the scythe.
Yeah,
right?
So your father is the Grim Reaper, and this is the launch of the PSP. This title was coming out with, and it was trying to make a cute.
It's like cute death, right?
Yeah, right. Like what
my grandma would say, "He's still working on that death game." Right. You get all upset about it, and I was like, "Look, listen, it's cute death, Grandma. It's fine." You know?
In fact, I believe Death Jr. was out, and Death Jr. 2 was starting development when we got there.
Right, we were working on Death Jr. 2.
So they had already done one whole version of the game.
Yeah, it was really successful on PSP because it was, I think, the first platformer, right?
It was definitely one of the first announced platformers. I don't remember if
it came out early. I remember it was like, and that was sort of the thing that got them those huge sales numbers on that first game, which, that's a whole nother subject. Let's not get into that. But, I think Death Jr. 2, was not a huge commercial success. It sold some copies, but didn't sell 500,000 like the first version did.
Yeah, it's typically very difficult to repeat a hit. Right? So games...
unless you're Nintendo.
Well, sure. I mean, even Nintendo, struggled, right? Like Super Mario Brothers 2 didn't come out in the U.S.
Right.
We got a game that they took from another version and they put all the Mario characters
Doki Panic.
Right.
That's what it was. Or Doki Da. I don't know what it's called.
Right. And I think for people now, if they wanted to play the true Super Mario Brothers 2, they have to get the Super Mario Brothers 2, the Lost Levels.
Yes, the Lost Levels as part of, I don't know, it was one of the Super Nintendo carts, and Nintendo's the master of getting you to buy the same game 100 times on whatever new platform they have. So I'm sure you can find it out there somewhere.
Right.
Well, you would never pirate this stuff. That's a bad idea.
So I want to so let's see. We talked about, I started on Geist.
Let's talk about the level you worked on Death Junior, because I thought that was the coolest level in the game.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
So again, I came on not to be a level artist. I came on to be an effects artist for the project.
Mm-hmm.
But there was just so much needs for Death Junior 2 that I took on, since I knew Maya, the ability to start building a level.
Right.
And so in that process, I just happened to, I feel like, luck out and get the level that had one of the most interesting premises, which was you had just basically inhaled this kind of toxic swamp gassy kind of thing. And so
I didn't know that part.
You were going into essentially like a Chuck E. Cheese. It was supposed to be kind of like
it was called Waffle World, right?
Yeah, a World of Waffles.
World of Waffles, and it was like trippy, psychedelic. Like,
so
you know, how, like Simpsons does the. I don't know. I'm dating myself, although they're still out, right?
Yeah.
They do those trippy, psychedelic. They do them in every single cartoon because.
Right. So we were trying to make the illusion of the character kind of going into a weird, trippy world, but we were building it on the PSP. We had limited ability to do like really dramatic distortions and things like that. So we had to just kind of build the level in a way that felt like it got weirder and weirder.
Right.
Right. So, the level.
Oh, that's interesting too. I just sort of just remember the colors. I like bright colors.
Yeah. So this was like using level design to tell a narrative, right? So there's actually two levels, but the first level is you start in a cave around the toxic waste, and you come around a corner, and the world is kind of torn apart. So it starts normal, becomes this torn apart world, and then as you approach the entrance to the world of waffles, everything is just more stretched and distorted. And then over the passage through the level, we show you like traveling into a pinball machine.
Right. Oh yeah, I love the pinball machine.
Yeah,
That's
you get into a weird distorted like bounce room. And so there's
And we had HDR lighting on that game. I don't really know what that means, but we had it.
Well, we had a process by which we modified the value ranges so that they were more dramatic than they would have been.
Of the hues and things.
Yeah, so no matter what was on the screen,
made the saturation a little bit higher.
Clamped the blacks and then the whites, so you got like really kind of dramatic contrast at all times.
Right. Okay, so that's what it is, folks. And I'm the programmer and he's the designer.
Well,
I just always remember that. Wow, it's the only game that's got HDR lighting.
And I think at the time it wasn't what any real programmer would have considered true HDR, but we were simulating the idea of what an HDR thing is. But anyways, so I was working on this level and working with my designer. My designer would draw up maps, and I would like build some stuff, and then we would change our minds together about things. And by the end of the cycle of building Death Junior, I realized like while I am an artist, I really enjoy thinking about the gameplay and like that storytelling and all those parts of it. And so I got into a point where I was like, hey, if we're moving forward on a new version, I would love to be more involved in the design stuff. And in our industry, typically the disciplines are fairly separated unless you're at a very small studio. So you kind of have to pick a track, and that's kind of where you are.
Right.
And so it was kind of a big deal that I was basically an employee who was an artist and wanted to be a designer now.
Right.
And I kind of had to like release my control of an art position to take on a design position. And I kind of went from someone who had, proven myself in art and had no proof in design.
Right. So maybe a little lack of respect at some points.
Yeah, and I kind of had to step down and really accept that I was a junior.
Let the seniors sort of take their help you make decisions.
Yeah.
I
So
guess.
I got a mentor through Chris Opdahl. And Chris Opdahl
was Chris Opdahl your mentor?
Yeah.
So Chris is now... he's at the Halo place, or the Destiny place. Bungie. My goodness, I'm terrible.
Yeah. No, so Chris Opdahl...
He's like the lead super freaking... I don't know. He hangs out with Bill Gates and stuff.
I don't think that's quite how it works, but
okay.
Yeah, Chris Opdahl was the lead designer of Death Junior 2. And when he left, he went to Bungie to work on I believe it was maybe Halo 3? I can't remember.
Yeah, it's one of the...
And then he has remained with Bungie, so when the 343 split happened, he stayed on the Bungie side, and 343 kept Halo, and then he started working on Destiny.
Got it.
But anyways, so he was like my first real introduction into like how to do design thinking, and
And he was really good. Like I worked with him on the actual controls for Death Junior, and he would always push me to like. Well, we would hate it, but, he would push me to make it better.
Right.
Like, he'd be like, and he would spend all day tweaking these little values that I gave him. And so, that's also a sign of a good designer, that you can push or a good lead, that you can push your team to do really great work.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's probably a good segue into, like, what does a designer do?
Mm-hmm. All right, so we're back with Mr. Glen McKnight here, design director. I forget.
So
senior design director, artist guy.
I would say I act more like a senior designer, but I am by title the design director at Other Ocean. And
so you're a individual contributor quite a bit. You're not just like saying, "Hey, designer, do this. Hey, designer, do that."
Right. So we are a smaller studio. The distinction in the title is that I am responsible for all designers at the studio, whether they're on my project or another project.
Mm-hmm.
So I am the lead designer on the title I'm currently working on, but I'm also responsible for overseeing just how other designers are doing at the studio and their individual teams and such.
Got it. So there's multiple games going on at the same point, or at the same time there?
Yeah, so we have one major title, and then we have probably a half dozen smaller titles, and a lot of them don't even have designers. They're just either a full engineering project, or like sometimes it's just art content generation. So yeah, I mean, I think that's a good point to talk about, like, what does the designer do?
Yeah, what does a designer do, Glenn? What the hell do you guys do?
That is a good
That's what the programmers always ask.
Yeah, it is nebulous, and I think
it's different from game to game too, isn't it?
Yeah, so every game you work on, every studio you work at, what a designer is can mean different things.
Right.
And it's unfortunately just a big catch-all word that says...
You're just the idea guy. You don't actually do any implementation.
Exactly, right? Like, I'm the idea guy.
Right.
Like, and I think that's why there's a little bit of a fantasy around being a designer.
Right.
People think, oh, if I get to be a designer, I get to, like, make the game. Like, I get to decide what everything is.
Which, I mean, you do have a lot of freedom that the other departments have less of, in a way, or... Right. It usually starts with like a brief from a publisher, or I don't know. Why don't you go into it a little more?
Yeah, so I mean, I like to think of the role of design as being responsible for managing the player experience broadly. So you are kind of a virtual player of your game at all points along the way. You're helping to shape what the story the player will see and experiences. You're thinking about how the actions and the events that they're going to do will be fun for them. And so your goal at all points, from the initial pitch through the last day that you're fixing bugs, is trying to improve the player's experience in a way that makes it, that interactivity is really engaging. Right. So, like I said, there's a lot of variation of what designers do. In my role, I mostly do an amount of like writing and design work for pitches. So when a client wants a game, they'll give us a brief of like, hey, we're looking for a new zombie shooter game, or hey, we own this license and we're looking for ideas of what someone could make with this license.
Right, because a lot of it's kind of hustle, right? I mean, you're making demos for these publishers to say, hey, we're the right studio for you.
Right. So
and that does end up being a reasonable percentage of your job, right?
Yeah.
And so, I mean, it's tough because some of that work kind of just gets thrown away at some point if if you don't get the contract or whatever. So
right. So where designers generally start on a project much earlier than other disciplines, and then often they can kind of come off. A lot of your designers can come off a project and move on to other things as the bug fixing, the art finaling happens, because you need to start looking for the next project.
Right.
So my role in that is I will get the brief. We'll work, internally talking about what we want to pitch them. I'll draft up either a PowerPoint deck or some version of a presentation, and then we'll contact the various disciplines. Get art involved to maybe make some concept work. Get engineering involved to make sure that, even though it's still the idea phase, we want to make sure that we believe we could actually do this, right? I don't want to say that I'm going to make a 400-person MMO game, with the 8 people we have,
right?
And then an engineer be like, that's just not possible.
Yes, I remember that with designers back in the day.
So you want to create a hopeful vision that is something that to reach for, to try.
Right.
But you have to still be practical, and I think it's a constant.
Things get cut. I mean, you have to. I mean, it's different. I'm now in the web development industry, and we have this sort of rolling releases. But with a game, it's really, once you put it out there, it's kind of done. I mean, there are updates and things, but those generally don't change the major features in the game.
Right.
A lot of times they're bug fixes, or there's DLC that works within the original engine. But it is a different sort of thing than other types of development. It's probably one of the last things in development where you actually release something and it's done, right?
It's true. I mean, there has been a growing push in even games to move to more live service models.
Right, software service.
But the industry we've been in and the industry that we kind of are modeled after is the make the release, move on to the next one. Very similar to the movies and such. It's less like a TV show with continuing episodes and more like big blockbuster, big blockbuster. So,
Well, and that's one of the things in the industry that's always difficult. People get sort of, they're almost like contractors in a way, in that, the studio gets a big project, the project's over, they don't have cash flow coming in, and, and that's kind of why that there's such a big push for you to get these new contracts and new jobs all the time, right?
Yeah.
Because you want to keep going. And
yeah, no, I mean, there is this very scary phase that happens at the end of every game development cycle, which is, will our studio have a new title or something else to carry? One of the challenges are, and you spoke to this a little earlier, that to make a game, you need a lot of people. And so, some amount of that can come from outsourcers or contractors. But when the game starts, when you don't have a game, you don't need very many people. And so the hope is that as one game finishes, you can quickly get a new project started up and just move everyone slowly onto that as the other one winds down. And but that doesn't always available.
We both kind of only worked at sort of indie studios. I don't know. You think things are different at a big Ubisoft or? I mean, I guess things are probably different if you're a company that makes Halo, for instance, where they just know that if they pump out another one of these games, that it's just going to do well in the market.
Right. I mean, every game that is produced is a bet. So, and there is always a time investment for when the return comes. So I know this sounds like, money mumbo jumbo, but essentially the entire time we work on the game, no one's making any money. Everyone's spending money.
Right.
The studio you work for might be getting payments, but they're also paying employees. So it's just a spend.
Right.
And not until the day the game is released, or if you go into early access or something, can you start returning any investment on that.
Well, that's interesting. Well, I thought publishers kind of, if you're a well-known studio, I thought they prepaid to some extent to keep
Well, they often pay chunks along
chunks,
the way.
milestones and things.
Right. So our studio gets paid a chunk, and then that money essentially goes directly to employees and operational costs.
Right.
And the studio that is paying you is paying right out of their pocket and using maybe profits from the last game they made or incoming profits from a game that's just releasing.
Right.
But no one is getting a prepaid thing. This is not like Kickstarter. We don't collect all the money first for the released title and then start making it.
Right.
And so,
well, that'd be a good scam to pull, right?
well,
I guess you could do it on Kickstarter too. It's happened, right? But,
and even on the Kickstarter method, you get one giant lump payment, and you better be able to use that wisely and get your game done. Because if you're not done with your game when you run out of money, no one's giving you more money until you have something to sell.
Right.
Where other software things, there is still that little lead in, but at some point you start selling some portion of the software, and then that becomes like a monthly churn of things that allows you to keep developing. And as long as people are paying, you'll keep developing. Games kind of work on a much longer cadence.
Right. Got it.
So I think we got a little bit into the finance side of that, but I think what that really speaks to is design needs to be involved in helping to craft the idea of something that people will really want to pay for. Right. You can have a person who's a great engineer, a beautiful art generator, and if the game that someone's going to play is not fun, rarely will a great piece of art or a well-engineered system solve that.
Right.
So your designer is expected to really know what is fun, and that that has been one of those terms that
sounds nebulous.
Yeah, it gets thrown around. Or I like to think that it's more about making something that's engaging. So if a game is about a moody, like Silent Hill kind of thing, it's not really about fun. It's about like getting invested in that scary world, and so you got to think about like how do you scare people and engage them. Or if you're making a game that's a really kind of thoughtful story game, you have to really have a story that like pulls people in.
Right. So
and it can be sad and depressing in parts, and then lifting. Heavy Rain,
like,
Quantic Dream,
iDarb.
Well, iDarb, I think, lived purely on like a weird wackiness, right? So
well, hang on, we didn't even say what iDarb is. iDarb came out for Xbox 360, right?
Xbox One.
Xbox One, and it was a free title by Microsoft that you guys worked on. And no, I didn't mean to sort of
sure,
but you were talking about all these emotional games, and iDarb is like sort of like this 2D soccer-like esports game, and it's very arcadey. So there's different things that you have to work on.
It speaks to a more classic game, right? Like
old school arcade.
It's essentially a 2D sports game, and it's all about fun, surprising, experiential kind of things happening.
Can we talk about the time you guys crashed Twitter on?
Well, yeah. So
what it was? It's called #iDarb, right? And it was sort of one of these first games that integrated these web services like Twitter, right?
Yeah. So we saw the rise of the Twitch Plays Pokemon, and we were in
Twitch and Twitter, right? It was integrated with.
And we were seeing how people were able to engage with a game through a chat system.
Right.
And we were already kind of playing with this other idea, which was a 2D kind of arena brawler-y thing. It's not like it's never been done before, but we were trying to just play experimental. And our creative director, Mike Micah, he had started sharing what he was working on Twitter. And somewhere in that kind of blend of like, I'm sharing the development of this new thing and watching how people could engage directly with games live, we thought, what if, as you're playing the game, the players can play a game, but anyone who's watching on a stream can influence the game in very direct and visceral ways.
By just making a tweet, right? Or chatting in Twitch.
Right. So
I didn't even know what Twitch was back then. I was just like, oh, whatever.
Yeah, I mean, so the Twitch one was actually, in a way, a simpler integration because Twitch already is connecting your video feed, and there's a chat system, and it's IRC that you can read that data and just pull it straight into your game. So our game could just watch the channel that was on and then look for hashtags. So we kind of bought in on that hashtag concept where there would be a hashtag and a word or a command, and then the game could read that code and then activate things in the game. So the most simple things are like, you would say hashtag, clown face, and there'd be a crazy clown that would fill the screen.
You guys tried to do a Rickroll, but it got taken out, right?
It might have got taken out.
Because of like copyright and stuff.
Yeah, but then the Twitter side was a little more challenging because Twitter is not connected directly to any one person's thing. So we were using a channel that all the tweets would channel through,
right? And
we were slamming it so hard,
right?
So
like,
fast.
well, because it was a free game. It came out on Microsoft, and then I think it was like I talked to one of your guys' engineers. It was something about they kept polling Twitter like from 100,000 consoles all at once is like a DDoS attack, right?
Yes, that's what it ended up happening.
I mean, so you guys had to patch it, and
yeah, we worked with the Twitter engineers to get the right flow through and to better understand like how. I think we weren't trying to do anything aggressive to them. We were just using the tools that they gave us. But I just think they never thought anyone would pull so regularly from so many systems to the same accounts. And so it led to a really interesting relationship where...
where they wanted to kill you?
No.
Just kidding.
Actually, the Twitter people were super engaged by it because...
Yeah, I mean, it's like sort of a new way to use their platform.
Yeah, it challenged the idea of like how people can do that kind of one-verse-many messaging.
Right. Very, very cool. Let's talk about, I know you've done some amount of charitable work with Other Ocean, and you've personally gone out to a classroom or two to just sort of get kids engaged. And, I think anything that gets kids interested in computers and computer science is really great. So can you talk a little bit about that type of effort?
I haven't done it anywhere near as much as I'd like to. It's just always a really... interesting.
Well, you got a kid now,
challenge.
So that's your charity.
Yeah. I worked with a group called Youth Uprising, and more recently, I did a little work with another really incredible group that's here in Oakland called Gameheads.
Oh, yeah. Marcus is involved with that.
Yeah,
right?
And that's actually through
one
one
of
our...
Marcus Montgomery. Maybe, hopefully, he'll do an interview with me someday.
Yeah, no, Marcus is incredible. He was a designer that I worked with on... I believe it was Gauntlet DS, which never came out. But
I heard it was leaked, though.
Yeah.
I don't know.
You can find a ROM for it.
Yes.
And Marcus clued me into actually both of these opportunities. And what they were was the ability to go and like show kids like how to make games from a professional point of view.
Right. Even just from like, what did they use over there to make stuff? Do you remember? Like,
it was primarily GameMaker.
Because you don't need code for that out of the box usually?
Yeah, GameMaker allows you to do a kind of drag and drop block system, similar to something like Scratch or one of these things, a little more complex, and then it has a full scripting language also built in. So the idea is you should learn from the basic block building and then learn kind of like what code generates things.
All right.
Yeah, and I think that what's really great about those ways of programming is they allow a person who isn't so comfortable with all the syntax and the kind of like the very direct language and spelling, and you can really think about the logic of programming.
Well, let's get back to the Gameheads thing. So you did that. You also did... You went to somebody's classroom. Was that involved with Gamehead, or
no?
That was a different thing.
So,
like just a friend, right?
Right. So the Gameheads was a mentorship where I worked
for kids in Oakland, pretty much.
Yeah. So they have a really great program. What they do is they bring kids together who want to make games, and they have an after-school, and I think it's even on weekends, program where pick kids who have different interests, like the guy who wants to be an audio engineer, the kid who's really into art, the kid who wants to do programming, and then like kids who either want to be designers or just don't know where they want to be. They put them on teams, and they basically put them through a program where they get to pretend, not pretend, but like to simulate development.
Oh, so, right, like rather than just like everyone's sort of going it on their own.
Yeah, it's so like a game jam.
I did mission bit volunteering for a semester basically, and it did seem like people there, they did have a few teams, but they were sort of going more individually. So that's kind of an interesting sort of approach to doing it, because really when you get in the industry, you're not making stuff on your own. If you're in a professional studio, you're at least on a team of a few people.
Yeah, I think that's actually one of the most innovative aspects of the Gameheads program, is that they recognize that what really you need to build is the ability to work on teams, right? It is very challenging to make games completely on your own,
Yeah.
And so you need to use people who have different skill sets and work together. And that is difficult. I mean, we both worked in games for years, and I'm sure even in software that you're working in, team communication is a very big challenge, because everyone sees things a little different, and everyone has different ideas of where the correct way to take a product.
Right. And some are more abrasive than others. So I'm not going to point to any fingers. Luckily, hopefully you're listening to this on the podcast version. I was pointing to myself, by the way, not Glenn. Glenn is very easy to work with. So let's see. You want to talk about the BattleBots thing that's going on in Other Ocean? I don't know it's not BattleBots. What's it called?
Tank Ball.
Tank Ball. So this is sort of like if you go to their office, which I've been there a few times, they have it's just like a fun house, like kind of. There's like the guy who runs it, Mike Micah, has like floor to ceiling retro games in his office, and there used to be a toy company that worked there before you guys were in that office. So it's always had this like sort of I mean, I'm sure it's not mystical for you anymore, but it definitely has that fun feel inside. And they're working on, can you say again the title of that?
Yeah, so right now they're working on a thing called Tank Ball.
Tank Ball.
It's in one of those really interesting places where you couldn't really call it early access. You can't really call it a release title. What it is it's building on the ideas from iDarb and the Twitch streaming and the interactive play, and
what is it from a high level?
So from a high level, it is
like if I go into your office, what do I see?
It is a soccer table with robots.
A physical.
Yes.
Physical, like in the real world, and it's all green screened up. Did you guys do anything with the green screen stuff, or are you just kind of testing it still?
Right now, it's a constant evolution. So there might be green screen stuff happening right now.
This is on Microsoft's competitor to Twitch, which is called Mixer.
Yeah, and I think what was special about Mixer and why we were excited to work with them on it was, A, we've worked with Microsoft before, and they're an incredible partner for us. Nice. And B, Tank Balls needed something that was a lot faster, and so one of Mixer's big selling points is they have a very low latency stream.
Oh, nice. So it's sort of the idea of Twitch. We want to give them some promo here. But...
Oh no, I mean Twitch started this all, right? Like YouTube has their own version.
You're saying that they have sort of a lower latency system, and right, because I remember I did like some basic streaming on Twitch, and it is delayed by about 7 or 8 seconds.
Yeah, I mean a little bit is no one ever expected or thought you would need as close to real time as possible, right? Like it's okay if you're just chatting with someone.
People can control these bots remotely from their computer, right? Is that that's the idea? And so I think they've had a couple betas so far, but it's pretty cool. Like I didn't actually see it in action because
I think it's streaming right now.
No kidding.
I think it's streaming almost 8 hours a day every day right now.
Wow, that's pretty cool. We'll have to throw a URL for that on the screen.
But yeah, it's just built on this idea of like, can we make experiences that allow people to play games without having to have a console or be like at one thing, and then also just
it's sort of like reality, not virtual reality. You're controlling real freaking robots in some space. I've seen this before. I got some. There's some game on iPhone where you can actually control one of those the claws,
yeah,
right? And you can actually supposedly they'll mail you,
yeah.
your little thing if you actually get one, which I don't.
Well,
know if
right.
you
So I
can
mean,
get.
I think for quite a long time, almost since the era of YouTube and streaming video, there's been webcams, and then very early on, programmers figured out how to let their webcams be controlled via keyboard or console command type things. I think what we're trying to do with Tank Ball that's unique is we're trying to allow multiple players from multiple points of view to all be playing.
And you have a first
observing.
person view of you're in this little battle bot or little tank that kicks around the ball and stuff. It's pretty cool idea.
Right. The idea is each player can see their individual first person view of their tank. There's an overview that basically the audience can watch, and they can either watch individual tanks through those views or they can watch from the overview. And using similar things to IDARB, there's just commands and controls, and those are all integrated into the mixer interface. And it allows players to essentially drive these robots around. And the base game is soccer. It's push a ball in, score.
Right.
But since it is all in the physical world, a lot of the fun is what they can do beyond that.
Right.
So I think
didn't you guys have them running around the office or something?
Yeah,
they got out of the.
Sometimes we release them out of their arena and let people drive them around.
Did they sign their NDAs and stuff?
Everything in the office, every plushie is all under NDA.
And the programmers love that when they're trying to focus, right?
Yes, there's nothing better than a robot driving around under your feet.
Yeah, I can think of a couple of the programmers over there that would probably want to crush one of those things while they're deep in thought.
And then right now, one of the fun things that's happening is, since it's a real game, there is, just like soccer field, you give two kids a ball on a soccer field and say, play whatever game you want. They might not choose to hit balls into goals.
Oh, interesting.
So there's a host currently actively engaging with the audience and giving, directives and ideas and stuff. So I think they're smashing hot dog buns and, pushing things around and just being silly and playing.
Very cool. Yeah. Very cool. I guess one last thing we can wrap up with is sort of the game engine thing. Back when we started, maybe Unity was first coming out, and I remember telling Glenn, this thing's never going to make it. If I can't edit the source code, there's no way that we're going to be able to make a shipping game that won't crash. And they really, have sort of taken over the industry. So how do you think, based on these game engines, that the industry has changed over the past 10 years or so?
Yeah, you could take either an optimistic or a pessimistic view of what game engines have these very public game engines have allowed. They've opened our industry to so many more people. So, today you can download Unreal, you can download Unity, and you can start putting things in 3D space and hitting play and moving around with a controller.
And in Unity, you can export them and upload them to Simmer.io.
Yeah, no,
the world's easiest place to upload a game.
Yeah, well, I think that's...
So it's opened it up to a lot of folks.
Right, and it's made the development side more open. And like you just spoke to, one of the things they allowed, which has always been a challenge, is they handle a lot of the get to the various platforms. So, from Unity, people who've used it are familiar with the idea that you can publish to web, you can publish to Android,
Linux.
Yeah.
They have everything. They have Switch. I think they do all the major consoles. It's pretty, from my perspective as an engineer, it's pretty amazing that they've sort of achieved something like that with, such reasonably good performance on all those different platforms.
Yeah, it's a huge testament to how much time and resources they put behind their engine.
And it was harder back in the day. We were writing, from my perspective, we were writing C++ code from scratch to, I don't know, freaking move a character forward. That is something that every game needs, but you had to build I remember we had to do, if you wanted a font on the screen, you needed to write your own blitter of these font glyphs that you'd have to cut up. So, yeah, and now it's opened it up to a wider audience, and it's also like empowered, I think, you guys to make games more efficiently than in the past. Would you say that?
Yeah. So I think
you guys are using Unreal on your current project.
On the current title I'm working on, it's in Unreal. It is the first full title that I've worked on that is entirely in one of these two engines that's for a published game. So previous to this, as you mentioned, we've always used either an in-house tool or an in-house language or something that is very custom to what we're building. So IDAR, Tank Ball, Monsters Love Candy, Death Junior, guys, everything I've ever worked on up to this point had been...
Oh, wow, so you've been working on custom engines just until this last project.
Yeah. And so what's great about a custom engine is it only does exactly what you want to do.
Right, it doesn't have the kitchen sink in there and with possible things you don't need. And
it just, like, one of the challenges of both Unity and Unreal is they're very powerful. And they have everything there. And it's not entirely obvious when you just walk into these, like, where you can add things, what's the best way to add things. And when you're working with a custom engine, the people who built the engine are generally there working
advisors
with you, and they can tell you exactly what you can and can't do.
That's a cool perspective. Like, I always kind of, think that, it's easier with the engines, but, when you think about, okay, the people that actually have all the passion for it are, located in Denmark or so. I forget where the Unity people are.
Right.
Like, you can post on forums, but you don't get that sort of one-on-one that you do get with the custom engines.
Yeah. So previous to this, if we'll take an example of a particle effect, I could say, hey, I'm trying to make the smoke trail do this on this rocket I'm working on, and instead of going to a forum and then watching some YouTube videos for a couple hours trying to find someone who implemented it similar to what I want to do, I would go to the engineer who wrote the particle system and say, hey, what...
So you could offload more work back then.
Well, it's not even just offloading. Ask, do we have the capacity?
Can we even do it? Yeah, that's a good point.
If we can do this, what are the parameters that are needed to solve this problem? You had experts in-house working with you.
Right.
And I think still to this day, expert knowledge of these engines is a huge step in the direction of this person's really useful. In fact, if you're thinking about hey, I want to get into the games industry, I don't know what I need, what skills, you think, do I need to know this language? Do I need to know this? I think picking one of these engines and really familiarizing yourself with
it. And just do it. Just go with it. Pick one of them. And, you just have to, okay, maybe it doesn't do everything that, you had in your head, but you just got to pick something and go with it. That's kind of, in web, there's just so many different versions of JavaScript engines. You do kind of kick yourself in the back if you pick the wrong one, but it's all a learning process, and that's through all these years of engineering and things that no one really completely knows what they're doing, and you just have to try, right?
Well, I think we're fortunate that there is kind of two big players in this space. There's Unreal, Unity.
There's a little competition, which is good. Yep. That keeps everyone on their toes.
Yep.
To keep making things better. If there's only one, would they innovate as quickly? I don't really know the answer.
Yeah. But unlike you mentioned web technologies, everyone can write a new one every day, and there is a lot of paralysis of choice of you just said, people want to pick which one to do. I think, like you said, Unreal and Unity both have their merits. They have their challenges.
Well, you said, this is surprising to me. You told me that Unreal actually has a blueprint system, which is more friendly to designers, potentially, than designers and less code-oriented people than Unity is, which... I think it used to be sort of the other way around.
Right. So
where Unity was a little more visually oriented, and Unreal was the really hardcore C++ only code.
Right. So
and C++ is hard, by the way.
Yes. So I think there is a huge break between writing code and all the other parts of developing games. Writing code is a very involved learning process. It requires an amount of precision. When I think of writing code well and making games that are very focused on code, you have to get really good at your spelling and punctuation, essentially, right? You think of when you learn to read and write, you didn't learn like where to put the right comma, where to put a period, how to spell, dessert versus desert. Like you could just say the word.
You're a master speller too, right?
Yes, I'm a terrible speller. And I think what trips up a lot of people about programming is not that they can't think about the logic of programming, but they get stuck on the I didn't initialize a variable with this way. And in this language, you do it this way with this particular command. And so I think...
So you think the syntax gets in the way of beginning work with that stuff?
I mean, this shift we've seen, it kind of started with almost children-level programming and has kind of floated up the industry, which is like blocks and nodes and graphs. I think even the first big adopters were in the visual arts world. So Maya, 3ds Max, a lot of these got these kind of visual diagrams of how shaders and stuff worked. And it took a long time, I think, for true engine programmers to feel like there was a value in putting that power into
the hands of someone that's more visual oriented versus a programmer or something.
And so in going back to Unity versus Unreal, when Unity came on the scene, it was simpler, and Unreal had a million tools. It didn't have a visual scripting system.
Right, yeah.
And so when you looked at the two in that light, Unity was like the one that you could get up and running and figure out sooner.
It had the editor and the...
the programming was C#, which is a simpler version of the language.
I think it was Unity script to start out. I'm not sure.
You're right.
Which is like this weird version of JavaScript, but
yes, you're right.
But they did switch over to C#, which is a standards-based language.
Yeah, and I think you maybe just even speak to different languages have different complexities, right?
Definitely, yeah.
A lot of you can see these graphs online where programmers kind of rank themselves of what language they work in and how they're more superior.
Speaking of that, I'm looking at your website here where it says, I got skills Adobe Suite 90%, Maya 80%, C#, 65%, Creative 110%. Yes. And it's got like these sort of bar charts here. I think it was actually very clever.
I think one of the things that makes allowing creatives to do more programming is they do things like 110%, right? A programmer would never want 110% because
it doesn't exist. It doesn't exist, man.
Right. And so what you get is you might get a less optimized, less clean, clear systems, but you'll get really weird, unusual creations out of artists and designers if you can let them use their brain style in a logic creation way.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. So let's end with this. If you were to give one piece of advice to an aspiring game developer or game designer, what would it be?
So I've always said to all people who want to be designers or are interested in game development is learn a little bit about all the disciplines. Spend some time, learn a simple programming language, get some basic skills in
even I've tried to draw a little bit.
And then play with those various spaces so you kind of know the challenges those people have. You don't have to be good at it, but it just helps you understand all the work that everyone's going to do on a team. And then find the thing that you're kind of passionate about and put some focus on it. And it's really helpful if you pick some little tool like Scratch or Game Maker, something that's very simple.
Glitch, I heard, is kind of one of the newer ones.
Okay,
too.
Yeah, that. I mean, you can get into the same thing again. What's the right one?
Right.
Pick one.
Right.
Make something. And when I say make something, it should be, make.
Keep that scope down, right?
Yeah, and just realize that it's your first thing, or it's your second thing, or your fifth thing, and you're a single developer. You're not 400 people on a team.
Right.
You can't make the world.
Right.
And you'll get frustrated trying to get to something that you'll never get to. You'll be much happier, making an Asteroids, making a Pac-Man, making something that's really straightforward that you can be done with and say, I made that.
Finish it and put it on the web on Simmer.io.
Yeah, put it on Simmer.io.
If it's a Unity game. And I think that's about all the time we have.
Yeah. Thank you.
It was good talking with you, Glenn. Glenn's a good friend of mine, so this is an easy one. I'll ask some more hard-hitting questions to the next bloke. Am I Australian or something?
Well, it was great being on the inaugural podcast.
All right. Thanks a lot, Glenn. Cheers.